So before we get started, we just wanted to tell everyone that you'll find a QR code on your table, which you can scan during sessions to feed in your questions. And then we'll use that while asking the speakers. So everyone will have one QR code on their table.
So next up, we have the pleasure of hearing from Satyaki Raghunath, the Chief Operating Officer at Bangalore International Airport Limited. He's about to give us the inside scoop on the inclusive design and award-winning services at Kempegowda Airport.
Hold on to your seats, folks, because I recently flew through Terminal 2, and I must say, Ayan, it's like stepping into a futuristic garden. I half expected to see elves pruning the bushes.
You're not wrong, Astha, and Terminal 2 is basically the hanging gardens of Bangalore.
Yeah.
Did you know that there are around 600,000 plants? That's probably more than in my own vicinity.
That's right. I mean, it's just truly amazing. And don't forget about the smart tech irrigation system. It's like BIL's really been mindful of everything, from runways to rain clouds.
Yeah, that's right, Astha. And in addition to this, I also really like how some customer service staff at the airport are trained to communicate using sign language and are equipped to assist passengers with hearing and speaking disabilities.
And how there are braille menus at all outlets in the airport. You know, it's such a thoughtful and intentional way to make people with visual impairments feel included. And of course, Bangalore Airport is now a member of the Hidden Disabilities Sunflower Global Network, an awareness initiative that discreetly communicates to all airport staff that passengers with an invisible disability may need additional support.
Yeah, it's just amazing, Astha. But wait, what are we still doing here?
Yeah.
Let's not keep everyone waiting and hear it from the source itself. Please welcome on stage Satyaki Raghunath, Chief Operating Officer at BIAL.
So, morning everyone, and it just gives me great pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you Nimi and Prashant and the whole Interweave team, and thank you Sajit for putting me in the spot. Actually, I don't know how qualified I am to talk about D&I and all of these things. I'm not the expert at this. I'm an aviation geek who got into aviation by accident. I had an architectural background. I went to design school, and then I went to grad school and sort of got into aviation very serendipitously. So I just want to talk to you about the BIAL story a little bit and what we're doing or what we've done. I don't think is there a clicker here? Sorry. And how many of you here are from Bangalore? Yeah, majority of the audience at least. Okay, great. So how many of you have been, how many of you go to to Bangalore, Kempegowda International Airport? Most of you, at least. Have all of you been there? Anybody who's not been there? Okay, that's good. So at least there's some context to this and it sort of makes things easier. So, this airport, as you all know, is about 15 years old. Does this work? No? This doesn't seem to be moving. So, all right, I'll figure out the tech glitch, but in the meanwhile. So, yeah, there we go. Somebody did something. Okay, so we are 15 years old. We are a public-private partnership, as you all know. So, effectively, we are also a public asset, and we are an airport which serves the city of Bangalore, right? All of you know that. And we have a shareholding where 74% is held by private investors over a 60-year concession, and 26% is held by the government of Karnataka and the government of India, sort of split equally, right? It was commissioned in 2008 as a greenfield facility, and we've just celebrated our 15th anniversary last year. And as everything in India, things grow and multiply much faster than any of us envisaged. So when the airport was originally sort of envisioned and planned and delivered, they thought of a two-runway airport system which would effectively sort of reach its full capacity over a 40-year period. So they thought it will reach a full capacity of about 40 million passengers in somewhere around 2040, 2045, something like that, right? And of course, wonder of wonders, right? Like everything in India, things astound us. In the first 10 years of our existence, we tripled in traffic volumes. We went from 9 million to 27 million in the first 10 years. When we celebrated, this year we will finish at about 37.5 million passengers. Next year we'll probably hit about 41 million passengers. And the second runway came in literally 20 years before anybody envisaged. So it was delivered in 2019, just before COVID happened. And as all of you know, we've also just opened Terminal 2 We commissioned the terminal in January of last year. The Prime Minister inaugurated it in November 22. It was commissioned in January of last year. International operations moved in September of last year. And so far, we've had some minor glitches, but I'm happy to say that we've had nothing major, right? Sorry, I apologize. How does this work? Can we go back up? Oh, sorry. Yeah, so we also have 36 airlines. We connect to a number of points across the world, and primarily our job is to connect Bangalore to the rest of the world, right? So the fundamental role of an airport is to connect a community with other parts of the world. And I think we've been exceptionally fortunate due to all of you, sort of who are our customers, who sort of are the audience, who use it every day. And we've had 37 million passengers, like I said, this year. We think all of you like going through the airport, and we think more and more of you will travel over the course of the next sort of 2 decades. And therefore, we sort of, one of our primary goals is to go out and get airline service to come to Bangalore, right? And today, I'm pleased to say that we are the hub for at least 2 major airline groups. We have Indigo, who has about 55 to 60% of the market share, depending on which month you calculate it. And we've got now the Tata Group, who have about 28% of market share. And based on last week's announcement, hopefully we will have even more growth sort of here in the Bangalore region, right? We've also done a lot of international connectivity over the course of the last 5 years that I think has been very exciting for the city of Bangalore. We've connected 3 new continents, and this happened in the middle of COVID, which is quite something, right? We connected Africa first. We have a flight to Addis. We then connected North America. We have a flight to San Francisco, as most of you know, which is the longest flight in the Air India network, about 17.5 hours to San Francisco. And we connected Sydney in September 2022, right? So these have all been great things. We also keep expecting to connect more and more places. We connected Munich in November. We had a second flight to a different Maldivian destination last year. We are having a second flight that starts to London on Virgin starting next month, or I think early April, I can't remember the exact date. And we've just announced a new flight to Bali, a non-stop flight to Bali, so all of you can holiday as well, right? So our job is to make you all travel a lot more, make you all spend more time at the airport, make you all spend a lot of money. I mean, these are all sort of our primary goals. So I know, anyway, but this is not about that, right? So we also have 70 domestic destinations. We've tried to build a very comprehensive network here in Bangalore, because it's very important to also be connected across India. 80-85% of our traffic today is domestic, although we are fairly confident that that percentage will change over the course of the next decade to about 75-25 or thereabouts. And very interestingly, we also connect about 26 cities which are within a 75-minute flying time of Bangalore, which means that we are a gateway to South and Central India. So if you look at all of these cities that connect in and around Bangalore, the idea is to sort of get more and more flights that will feed through here and go. But what does all of this mean to sort of in the context of diversity and inclusion? And I think when we thought about it, and as many of you know, and as sort of Nimi alluded to, and as Astha and Ayan spoke about, we never thought about it this way 15 years ago, right? When we thought about the airport, all of us thought about what do we need to do from a capacity perspective to create enough capacity for airlines to come, for passengers to come, and that was our primary thought. And if you look at most airports or aviation facilities around the world, the principal constraint at an airport is, any ideas? No space, but what is the constraint? What makes it? So the runway is a single defining factor, but what is the constraint? I mean, runway constrains capacity, but the principal thing from our perspective is, can you hear me better in this, or, okay, I don't know. Anyway, but the principal issue is the fact that aircraft, right? Aircraft can only move in certain ways. So fundamentally, everything at an airport is thought about with respect to aircraft movement. So if you look at everything that we do, right, it is about the fact that the most constraining factor is aircraft movement, right? And it's based on the fact that aircraft are governed, or movement of an aircraft is governed by so many regulations due to safety and security, which, by the way, makes it air transport the safest mode of transport. So, in fact, Nimi and I were having a conversation just before this where we were talking about the fact that various people are nervous to fly. And I always tell people that, it's the safest mode of transport. You're more likely to go on the pavement in Nama Bangalore and sort of fall into a manhole than you are to sort of die in an aircraft crash, right? I mean, it's true. So if you think about it that way, the biggest issue is the movement of aircraft. And that means that for a long time, I think when you look at airports, when you look at sort of public utilities and assets like that, we thought about what the most constraining factor was. So I've worked at stations, I've worked at sort of with railway companies, we worked with toll roads, with airlines, with train operators, etc. And everybody thinks about what is the biggest constraint. And the constraint fundamentally is about aircraft movement or train movement or all those things. We never thought about the fact that it was passengers, customers, so on and so forth. And equally, from a diversity and inclusion perspective, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, it was not even a topic on the agenda, right? So as Nimi said, we've had to evolve, we've had to change our thinking, we've had to think about what we need to do, and we also had to think about how we can be far more inclusive, especially today, when there is so much more awareness, when there is so much more commitment to the fact that we need to be both diverse, we need to be equitable, we need to be inclusive. And therefore, about a year and a half ago, some of us sat down together at BIAL, and we came up with a diversity program, DEI program, right? And it's called Be Included. And the fundamental goal of Be Included is to have a D&I vision, where we say that we are committed to creating and sustaining a diverse, equitable, and inclusive organization. Right? An organization where a number of different views are encouraged, actively encouraged, and people are allowed to be themselves. And in the long term, it would mean that all employees across the organization, regardless of what their affiliations are, regardless of what they think, regardless of what they feel, regardless of what their general sensibilities are all made to feel sort of valued and treated with dignity and respect, right, equally. And it's very, very important that we all sort of take cognizance of that. But these sorts of things are very, very easy to say. It's very easy to put a D&I vision together. It's very easy to put a charter together and so on and so forth. But it's much more difficult to actually then figure out how to roll it out and how to make sure that the organization, and not just the organization, but the wider ecosystem is aware of what you're doing, right? So if you think about this, we had to think about what our D&I charter was and base it on 3 or 4 key pillars or concepts that we had to simplify it around. And the idea is you have to simplify it in a way that everybody understands. I mean, that's the other thing I think that all of us have realized over the course of time, which is you've got to essentially get to a place where not just your employees, but literally everybody who interacts with you understands it in sort of, for the lack of a better phrase, let's say lowest common denominator, right? You've got to be able to convey a message that everybody gets. And we based it around what we could call the 4 C's. The culture, which I already spoke about. The idea of a career, where effectively what you're trying to say is that the culture will foster the right environment for you to attract, develop, and retain sort of the best talent, and especially make it as diverse as possible. A third aspect, which we will focus on today a little bit more in detail, is the idea of the customer. And for us, right, a customer today is the passenger. And if you think about airports 20 years ago, when I started my career in aviation, and I did a lot of work for airlines and airports, the airport thought of the airline as its customer. The airline thought of the passenger as their customer. The airport never thought of the passenger as their customer, right? So the airports were a B2B business, and the airlines were a B2C business. Today, I think all of us have become much more of a B2B2C or a B2C business almost directly. And I think regardless of which industry all of you are in and which sort of sector you are in, all of us fundamentally have moved to a concept of being far more focused on the customer, and we've all become very, very B2C, right? So in that context, the idea of what you think of with respect to design, what you think of with respect to how you are planning for it, with respect to infrastructure and facilities, all of those things becomes very critical and important. And you must remember that this is an airport, which means large pieces of infrastructure are delivered, and it's delivered in big chunks, right? So it's not something that we thought of on day one. So many things have to be changed, many things have to be modified, many things have got to be sort of thought through with respect to experts coming in and telling us, for instance, how we need to do this and so on and so forth. So it takes time. So that's the other sort of lesson that we've learned, which is that it takes time, right? And finally, there is a community. There's an airport community, which means that it's not just the employees at BIAL, but there's a wider ecosystem. 30,000 people work at the airport. We have 1,500 odd employees, right, Sajid? 1,500? Yeah, 1,500 odd employees here at the airport. But we have 30,000 plus people working on a day-to-day basis across the airport, right? So how do you make sure that the ecosystem is also aware and sensitized to many of these issues of diversity and inclusion? And these were the 4 sort of broad pillars that we thought about when we set out our charter, right? Now, how does that translate into the part that we're going to focus on today, which is the customer, right? And building infrastructure and facilities. And if you think about it, like I said, we have 37 million passengers this year. And that means that fundamentally we have about 1 lakh passengers traveling through our airport every day, right? So we have 100,000 passengers traveling through the airport. As you all know, we have 2 terminals, we have 2 runways. Eventually we will have about somewhere between 80 and 100 million passengers, which means that we will have more than 2.5 times what we have today, right? So we're going to be dealing with 250,000 passengers alone every day in the long term, somewhere in the 200 to 250,000. And it will mean that our ecosystem, which is about 30,000 people today, will probably grow to about 70, 80,000 people in the long term in terms of number of people working across the airport. So when you think about all of this, we thought of, from our perspective, as a first step, the idea was to make the end-to-end travel experience as easy as possible. I'm not for a minute trying to say that we've solved everybody's problems. And just so you are all aware, we get emails every day, about some of the challenges that customers face, some of the challenges that passengers face, some of the very unique sort of issues that people with disabilities or what we call PRM here on the slide, which means persons with restricted mobility, right? Which means that if you're on a wheelchair, or let's say you have an impairment to movement, so on and so forth, you have challenges. And we get feedback every day. And we take it very seriously. It's not as if we, and I think many of you might come and say, but I went to the airport and this wasn't there or that wasn't there. Rest assured that we are looking into it. It takes time, because when we make a change to any of these things, we've got to take out infrastructure, we've got to put new infrastructure in, and it's about three things, right? One is about the process. We have to change the entire process, because the airport is, again, a very restricted environment which is regulated. The second aspect is infrastructure. It's something that takes time, so there is a second bit, which is the physical infrastructure that we have to deliver. And the third piece, which I think is the most important piece that I think all of you who are in this space, who are far more sort of aware of it than I am, is the people part of it. So you've got to make sure that the workforce also is exceptionally sensitized to the fact that these are all very, very serious issues. And unless you're somebody with a mobility impairment, or unless you have a disability, or unless you have something, for instance, which in many ways or many cases can't necessarily be seen by everybody, that people are aware of, it's not easy. I can do all of the changes from an infrastructure perspective or a process perspective, but if you don't sort of address the people part as seriously as you do, any change that you make with respect to even being inclusive by design, or designing with people with needs, special needs, for instance, in your mind, will be a failure, right? So every one of these things has had three aspects to it. One is the process part, the second thing is the infrastructure part, and the third bit is the people part, right? So for instance, if you look at all of this, I'm not going to dwell into this, but we have dedicated drop-off spots. We have a buggy service that takes people, for instance, from curbside to gate, or between parking areas and the curbside. We've got specific entry gates for people with restricted mobility or disabilities. We've got check-in desks, which are at different heights, for instance, that allow people to check in the way they want to without necessarily having to have somebody else always assist them. We've got washrooms that are dedicated for people with disabilities or PRM. And finally, we've also got security lanes where they get access and priority, right? These are all things that have happened over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, and it's not something that we had set up on day one, because quite frankly, even we were not aware of the fact that all of these things were very, acutely painful things for people who couldn't move like all of us necessarily do every day. And this is something that's evolved over time. We've also taken a number of other initiatives, which include sort of 21 washrooms in Terminal 1, 24 washrooms in Terminal 2, which are PRM enabled. We've got, as somebody said here before, we've got Braille-enabled menus and sort of in all of our restaurants. So if any of you go there to the airport and don't see it, please let us know, because we will make sure it's there. They're supposed to have it. We've got staff who are specially trained with respect to sign language, with respect to sort of assistance in terms of helping people across the entire airport ecosystem. We've got height adjustable sort of info desks and check-in counters and toilets and sort of drinking fountains, etc., for people with challenges with respect to mobility. And finally, these are all things that keep evolving, and we will keep adding to these things as more and more ideas sort of come to us. And one of the things that I would encourage this audience also is that, because we're a public utility and maybe we don't think of everything all the time, if you have other ideas in terms of other facilities that could be done, please do reach out to us, because, we are never going to sort of be able to think about all of this ourselves. So that feedback that you provide us, that input that you give us, is absolutely critical to make sure that we can do more, right? We want to do more, and it's not that we don't do it. It's just that sometimes we are not able to think of the entire gamut of possibilities ourselves. So it is important that all of you sort of provide us with feedback, right? So we expect the public to do that. We also launched something called the Sunflower Lanyard Scheme, and we were the first airport to do so here in India. And the whole idea was that, this is fundamentally, we use this program where the employees at the airport are now trained in order to help passengers with disabilities or other challenges. And it is something that's very sensitive because sometimes, like I said, these are not outwardly visible, right? People may have autism, people may potentially have diabetes and therefore be subject to fluctuations in blood pressure. Other people, for instance, might have anxiety. And a lot of people have anxiety when they fly, as we were talking about. So these are all things that are not necessarily externally visible immediately. And the whole idea is to see how you can also address those things, right? It might not always be visible, but you will find people with a sunflower lanyard across the airport who are specifically trained to address some of these challenges, right? In addition to this, two of the other things that we did that I'm very, very thrilled to talk about is, one was Mitti Cafe. How many of you have seen Mitti Cafe at the airport? Fantastic, right? It's a great place. So it started off where we met somebody, Hari met somebody, and the owner and operator of Mitti Cafe sort of said that we'd like to do something at the airport, and we have multiple locations now at the airport where Mitti Cafe is present. And just anecdotally, a great story is that it became such a hit that the Chief Justice of India was going through the airport. He came there, and he went there, he met the owner and the people who were running Mitti Cafe, and he was so thrilled that he actually invited them to the Supreme Court, right? And they have something now at the Supreme Court which Mitti Cafe is running. And then, based on that, when the President visited the Supreme Court, Srimati Draupadi Murmu, right? She went to the Supreme Court and she saw it, and she was so thrilled that the President has now asked them to do something at Parliament. So, these are the things when we talk about how some of these initiatives are a force multiplier and sort of something that is a catalyst for change. I think even small things make a difference. It's not something that we envisage, but the fact is that by providing a platform, by doing something like this, it allows far more, collective action, which people who are even sort of much more influential than any of us can do. But fundamentally, it's all of you who go there, who visit it, who sort of give them the encouragement to be themselves, to really do whatever they have to do, and make sure that you make them feel that they're no less than anybody else who is potentially got all of, who has no physical challenge, for instance. And I think the fact is that if they can do that, if they're confident enough to be able to do that with such enthusiasm and such joy every day, it sends a powerful signal. And I think these sorts of initiatives and the fact that a Chief Justice and a President, for instance, have recognized it and encouraged it and gone out and made sure that their voice is heard is incredible, right? So that's a great initiative. And we also launched a Disability Inclusion Office in collaboration with Inclusa that was powered by Enable in India. And the whole idea of that is to enhance accessibility, design sensitization programs, and provide job opportunities at the airport. So we've got people within the BIAL staff now that we hire also, where people with disabilities, with challenges are part of our workforce. And we are sort of thinking through some more programs where we talk about how we can get more participation from the LGBTQ community within the airport and so on and so forth. And that is a conversation that we're already having internally. It's going to take a few months, but I think because we've got to do it in a phased manner, because one of the challenges with that also is, as much as you sort of want to be inclusive, there has to be a sensitization program within the airport, within the employees, to make sure that when they come in, when they are part of the program, and when they are sort of part of the community, they don't feel as if they're sort of being looked at awkwardly or spoken to differently or whatever it is. And I think it's very important to make sure that our employees get the right sort of training and the right sort of, let's say, awareness and sensitization before we do something like that. So that is also something that we've launched. From a technology and systems integration perspective, we've got automated backdrops, we've got ATRS, which all of you have seen, which is sort of the place where the trays come automatically, you can take it out and you can move your baggage. We've got passenger enhancement systems which have been enhanced with something called assistive listening systems, which effectively what they do is, if you've got a hearing aid, right, what it does is it tunes out the sort of other noise, and it makes sure that it sort of amplifies the noise that comes through the announcement systems. So that if you've got sort of a hearing challenge, if somebody's making an announcement, right, in terms of saying your gate has been changed or some other announcement about your flight or whatever it is, you can sort of hear that rather than all the other noise, right? And we've also got kiosks across the airport which fundamentally allow you to print boarding tags and boarding passes and baggage tags and things like that. So there's a lot of technology that you see at the airport. DigiYatra, that how many of you have used DigiYatra here? Okay, great. I mean, I know there's some controversy about how much data you want to give. I understand that. And I'm not sort of trying to advocate that everybody should give their data. You should do it only if you feel absolutely comfortable. But Google has all our data, by the way. Huh? You know that, right? I mean, effectively, every time I have a conversation about going, even with my friends, about the fact that, let's go to Goa or let's sort of do something else in Sri Lanka or Bali or whatever it is. 10 minutes later, my Instagram feed has got sort of something in Goa and Bali, and so your phone is listening to you, Google is listening to you. So if you really think that, all your data is safe, I don't know what to tell you about today. So anyway, but having sort of joked about all of that, please, one of the great things about DigiYatra was that we were trying to go away from this whole idea of presenting a physical boarding pass. So even that, from an inclusivity and D&I perspective, the idea is, why do you need to have a physical boarding pass? And when we thought about what we needed to do for Terminal 2, the genesis of DigiYatra was born out of that idea. So it was actually developed in the Bile Innovation Lab. And the idea was to see how your face can be your boarding pass, right? And when we started off and when we did some of these early experiments and we saw that it was quite encouraging, we also had to go out and then talk to the ministry. We spoke to Nandan Nilekani and sort of the UID guys and all of them. And then we came to the conclusion, which I'm glad we came to early on, which was we have to get together to do it as a pan-Indian initiative. It made no sense, for instance, for us to do something here in Bangalore and then for all passengers to have to go to Bombay and Delhi and other places where they had to use a different system, right? It had to be something that you could use everywhere. And that, again, by design is inclusive, which is that you don't have to sort of think about doing something at a different airport differently. So this is something that's now rolled out at 8 airports across India. And the idea is that over the course of this year, it's going to be rolled out at another 20-odd airports across India. And the principle is that you will be able to use your face as your boarding pass. I mean, and the goal in the next 5 years is to also have the immigration system set up in a similar way, which is essentially, if you've been to Singapore, or if you've been to Canada or Australia or any of these places, fundamentally you go there, you put your passport, it takes a picture, it knows you've gone through, you don't have to stand in this counter and talk to people you don't need to talk to and get your passport stamped, have something else checked and all these stupid things, right? I mean, the idea is to just make sure that you can go through as quickly as possible. Because at the end of the day, the thing that causes more stress at an airport or any of these places is standing in a queue. Nobody wants to stand in a queue, right? I mean, all of you know that. And I keep telling my team that actually nobody cares. You can do whatever you want about all these things. People don't want to stand in a queue, right? I mean, at an airport, that's what bugs everybody the most. So I think it's very important to sort of keep that in mind also. So we did that. And finally, with respect to 2 other topics that I just wanted to touch on briefly, right? We moved away from this whole idea of corporate social responsibility. The idea is to create social value. And at the end of the day, what we do is that we are an airport that serves a community. We serve the metropolitan region of Bengaluru. And the whole point is we've got to do more for the communities that surround us. And in our case, there were about 5 or 6 different villages which gave about 4,000 acres of land in order to get the airport delivered, right? And we work very closely with these communities to make sure that we develop all their schools, and we work on a number of programs, Namma Shikshana, Namma Jala, Namma Uru, Namma Nela, number of programs across sort of the spectrum. And the whole point is to look at girls' education and education in general, as well as clean water and sanitation. And these are some of the principles that we focused on. And we've actually developed 6 schools that we work with in the vicinity of the airport. And again, I would encourage any of you who are interested, please reach out to us. We will take you and show you these schools because we work with them. And what we've done is not just design them, and we've designed them on the same principles as we've designed the airport, which is that they're completely powered by renewable energy, right? They've got technology there which makes sure that from a safety and security perspective that children are safe. We work with them on the principles of their education, their syllabus, and their performance, including helping with teacher selection and training and things like that. So, and if I'm not mistaken, Sajid can probably add, I might not have my facts exactly right, but I think within sort of Karnataka and sort of the public school system, we've gone from being, I don't remember, I think we were in the teens in terms of performance, but we are now in the top 3 performing districts. I mean, these schools are amongst the top 3 performing district schools in Karnataka. So that's something that we're very thrilled about. And all of these schools, right, these schools are nicer than the schools I went to when I was growing up. Much nicer, seriously. And it's a great thing. And I'm not saying it sort of in a jovial way. I think the wonderful thing is children have the opportunity. Children can go there and have opportunities that, all of us took for granted. And many of us in this room are very privileged. I mean, I consider myself exceptionally privileged because I come from a family where women were educated 100 years ago. And you have no idea what that means, right? Your entire perspective and outlook changes when women are educated. And you don't even realize it because you take it for granted. And it's something that not too many people have had the fortune to have. Because I've seen other sort of families where only first and second generation women are getting educated today. And to have these opportunities means that it's life-changing, because your entire perspective on life changes. And it's very, very important that all of us make sure that the wider society and everybody also have similar opportunities. Because if India is to progress, it's all well and good to be a $1 trillion economy by 2047. But we've got to change our way of thinking in terms of how we live, how we sort of are more inclusive, how we get communities more involved, and how we do more for people who are marginalized. Because the fundamental, let's say, verdict on society is when the marginalized communities have as much of a voice and don't feel marginalized and feel part of the mainstream. And it's very, very important that we sort of address that issue, and therefore these things are very, very important, right? And we also do a number of, I've already talked about this: renewable energy, emergency preparedness, monitoring, clean and safe water. So this is again based on something else which is very important, which is our sustainability vision. So we have a very strong sustainability vision. We are one of the foremost airports in the world with respect to sustainability. We are ACI 4-star plus rated today, and we are working towards 5-star rating at this point. And we've actually, some of these, I should have probably looked at this a little more carefully, because these things have been achieved. So we are already energy neutral. So we are completely powered by renewable energy across the airport. I'm very, very thrilled to tell you this, but fundamentally we are powered by a combination of solar and wind, right? We are 70% about solar, 30% wind, and we've just yesterday signed an agreement with CleanMax as well, which some of you might have seen in the media, to become even more reliant on renewable energy across the airport. The second aspect is we are water positive, and for those of you who don't know what it means, fundamentally for every liter of water that we consume at the airport, we generate 2.36 liters of water, which through rainwater harvesting, through retention in our ponds, so on and so forth. And this is particularly germane in this conversation because Devanahalli was in a rain shadow region, and you had to really dig deep with bore wells and things like that to get sort of to the water table. And today you can strike water at a very, very low level because of the amount of groundwater that has been harvested through these ponds in the vicinity of the airport. So it's something that also we take very seriously. We are working on a solid waste disposal plant. This should have been ready during COVID, but because of COVID it's been delayed. But by the end of this year we will have zero disposal to landfills as well, as far as solid waste is concerned. So that's something that we take very, very seriously. A number of other minor things that I'm not going to talk about. But, and this is, there's recognition and reward, so we put it in there, but really it's not important. What is important is the fact that we sort of are a public utility. We represent Bangalore. We represent the government of Karnataka. We represent the government of India, right? And we represent all of you. We are sort of a public asset, and at the end of the day, the people of Bangalore have to feel as if the airport serves a very strong purpose, which is 2 or 3 things, right? We touch lives, we enable journeys, and we create experiences. And those are our 3 fundamental goals as we set out to become the gateway of sort of South and Central India. And that's sort of where I wanted to leave this conversation. And I just wanted to thank you all again for the opportunity today to be part of this magnificent crowd. Thank you, Nimmi and Prashant and the Interweave team, and Sajid also for giving me this opportunity. I'm really not the D&I expert, so if you have very deep questions, I might not be able to answer them very well. I apologize in advance, but happy to take any questions. Yeah, sure.
What was the key game changer in thought for you when you began this
In terms of what? No, when you say game changer, but in terms of...
Yeah. So you thought that this is required in terms of, serving the needs of differently abled people. But, as a person, what was it that, led to your commitment and movement ahead? Because it was a big commitment.
So I think I'll answer that question in 2 parts, right? It was not so much... I think all of us were probably subconsciously aware of the fact that most public facilities are not necessarily very PRM friendly or D&I friendly and so on and so forth. But it takes time to also think about, knowing a problem and then knowing what to do about it, right? So I think it took some time with respect to trying to think about the design changes or the attitudinal changes or the process changes that we require in order to then provide a solution that was fit for use. Because it's not something that we do as a one-off. See, it's one thing to say that, let's say somebody is coming to my house once in a while. It's very different from sort of dealing with that than saying 100,000 people are going to go through your terminals every day, and of them a certain percentage are going to have challenges, and you better think of a permanent solution so that you can really address some of these challenges which are becoming far more, let's say, visible to all of us than it was maybe in the past. I think part of it is the fact that there is a societal awareness at this point also which creates enough attention to some of these issues. I mean, I think earlier we didn't know enough, to be fair. When we started knowing more and we started doing a little bit of research and digging deeper, we sort of started understanding some of the challenges that people face. So we talked to a lot of people, user groups, people that we knew within our sort of wider friend circle or family, relatives, ecosystem partners, so on and so forth, who talked about what challenges they had, right, and what passengers might have, and then worked with various user groups to think about how to incorporate that in the design. And in some cases, it was incorporated into the design as we thought about it and as we delivered infrastructure. For instance, T2 is much better that way. But in some cases, I will say, for instance, in the case of bathrooms, actually T1 has better bathrooms than T2 today. And it's more sort of interesting or far more easy for passengers with restricted mobility to use some of those washrooms. So it's not that we get it right all the time also. So we're trying to fix those things. So, but I think as a philosophy, I would say that maybe 5-6 years ago when we suddenly realized that we have to do this, I mean, this is a non-negotiable, and we have to make sure that passengers with any sort of disability have the least amount of inconvenience as they go through a public facility. We started bringing it into every conversation, and I think that's the starting point, sort of bringing it into every conversation, making sure that you're having those discussions, and even that is a start, and then trying to see how you deal with that with respect to, you know, incorporating it into design and then making sure you can implement it and then roll it out.
Thank you.
Sure.
But I have one more question.
Okay.
The 30,000 people that you had to sensitize, I think, would have been the bigger challenge.
Well, we've not sensitized everybody yet. No? It's a process. And this is not because we failed. It's just because it takes time, right? So it depends on what you see. So if you're somebody on the front line at operations looking at passengers, you see it more frequently. If you're a baggage loader, right, you don't necessarily see it if you're working behind the scenes. If you're somebody in the cargo terminal who's sort of doing something else in an office, you may or may not see it. But I think the other very important part of this conversation is more and more people with challenges and disabilities and a number of other issues, right? Even coming out and saying, for instance, that they're, let's say, LGBTQ or any of these things are being seen in the workforce. So today you have colleagues who are LGBTQ, you have colleagues who have challenges, who are not so reticent to talk about it. And that's as important because all of a sudden they're with you, they're your friends, right? They're your colleagues. And I think that changes the entire dialogue because you start thinking of, yeah, I've known this person for so long and they're my friend and so what, right? And if we've got to make sure that this environment, this organization, the culture, etc., has to be inclusive enough to include all of them, right? And for them not to feel as if they're being looked at any differently. And I think once you start doing that, it starts coming to every conversation anyway because you don't think of it sort of separately. It's part of the actual conversation that you're having on a day-to-day basis, or you start thinking about it subconsciously, saying that we will do it anyway. Yeah. Okay. Apparently.
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Satyaki. I know people had many more questions, but unfortunately we're running out of time. I really like the shift from CSR to creating social value, and I did not know personally that the entire airport is run on renewable energy. So again, one more round of applause for Satyaki. Thank you. If you have any more questions from now on, please write them on cue cards. We've come to know that there are no QR codes, they're actually cue cards. So please write your question on cue cards and then just hold it up and someone will come to collect it, right?